Hey, it's Louisa Tanner-Munson from Feel Good Astrology. Well, welcome back to the ongoing discussion on this channel about Mars Cazimi. So last night I had a very open and wild chat at times with fellow astrologer Kimberly Crow from the Kimberly Crow channel. She is also known as I Am Kimberly Crow, and she's been on before, and she's very intuitive as an astrologer, has very sort of different experiences of planets, whereas I consider myself to be quite intuitive. So I look at a chart and it kind of pops out at me and I start seeing images and stuff play out. Kimberly almost has real life experiences of the planet speaking to her almost as people. So it was quite wild what we were talking about. So, last night gave some kind of thoughts and feelings about the Cazimi. And we also looked at past Cazimis and also where Mars was rising each time. And spoke from our own personal experience. So, one of the things we did, we looked at the Cazimi from 2017, 2019, 2021, and spoke each of us about what happened to us in our lives. So it was quite helpful to see. And it's interesting, we've both got Scorpio ascendant. We're both doing very similar things at the same time. So for instance, in 2017, when the Mars Cazimi was in both of our ninth houses, we both moved in quite a big way. So I emigrated from the UK to Portugal, and Kimberly moved from Sedona back to her hometown. So, really, really big change. And so we were looking through the different Cazimis and noticing how each 2 years or so, there's a new flavor. And one of the things that I observed as well was the changes for me as a mum. I noticed that when the Cazimi, in between the Cazimi and the rising, like where Mars rose for the first time, where he was next seen in the sky after the Cazimi, when that crossed over an angle, something really major happened. So for instance, when he crossed over my midheaven, that also corresponded with my emigration or my migration to Portugal. It also corresponded with the birth of another child, my third and last child. So yeah, there was some quite good information that came out just from studying our own charts and what we could learn. And I would absolutely recommend that you do that yourself in your own charts. Or if you want me to go through them for you back a certain distance, and give me a call, book a session, and I can work through that with you. So yeah, all very sort of interesting stuff. Something else that also came up was about our thoughts and feelings about what had happened in the world alongside these changes we were going through with this Mars cycle. So what I wanted to do is just to kind of retell the Mars story a little bit from my own perspective. Also share this Mars Cazimi, the chart for it. So exactly at the moment of the Mars Cazimi, when Mars is exactly in the heart of the sun, exactly conjunct the sun, what is going on? Because that's also going to give us a flavor for how that plays out. I'm also going to look at the rising chart. So yeah, this is something that's worth paying a little bit of attention to. In a similar way, when you're looking at Venus retrograde, I did quite a lot of Venus work earlier this year. With Venus retrograde, we're also talking about like how these patterns replicate in our charts and how we have these same stories playing back. But we're also looking from the moment that Venus became a morning star or an evening star. We were looking at the moment there was that change, the moment when they were seen in the sky again. Now, Mars, at the time of the Cazimi, Mars appears to disappear. So we stop seeing Mars in the sky. And when Mars returns, that really shows how we express the Cazimi. So, there's often a month, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But for instance, where the Cazimi occurs, that really describes the energy of the Cazimi. And then where Mars rises in your sign thereafter, we get a feel for how you use that Mars Cazimi. So for instance, in 2017, when it was in my 9th house, it rose in my 10th house. And it was strange, we were moving to Portugal to lead an easier life, actually. that was the aim, was that I could continue to be a stay-at-home mum and just do a little bit of astrology, but not that we needed to live on my wages or anything, on my earnings. And actually, when we moved to Portugal, it was a lot more expensive than it was for us in the UK. And I realized that I really needed to bring in a good wage. I mean, it was easier if we'd stayed in the UK, it would have been very difficult because the conditions there make it very difficult to earn money in a way that you want. You know, I wanted to be able to work part-time so I could raise my children and really be there for them. The reality, you know, we moved and the move was great. And the big shock was, in that time, all the prices went up in the UK, in Portugal. There was a huge, huge rise. And so we'd moved to a more conducive area to raise our children. And yet I was needing to work more than more than part-time. And so, yeah, my move coincided with me coming back into the public eye a bit more and to work a lot more, to work a hell of a lot more than I was expecting. So, you know, it played out that we moved. All the moving energy was there from the actual Cazimi itself. And the effect it had and played out on me was that I became somebody that went back to work fully in that 2-year period. So, yeah, it's really important to see where the Mars Cazimi sits in your chart. And what's actually more important, I think, is to see where it's rising. So we've got 2 charts to look at. We've got the chart of the Cazimi itself on the 18th of November. Again, it really depends on where you're sat in the world. You could look at the chart from a local perspective. I've set mine for the UK and Portugal. They're in the same time zone, which makes it a bit easier. But I've set it for London, seeing as you know, that's where the median point of time exists at Greenwich Mean Time. That's where it was all established. So I set my chart for London. So it happens at 5:43 in the morning on the 18th. And then the actual Mars rising is on the 9th of January in 2024. So I'm going to look at both of those charts. So hopefully you'll get the feel for how you can translate it into your own chart. So let's have a look at this now. So, yeah, so on the conversation with Kimberly, as you'll see here, we've got the date of the Cazimi that we looked at. So it started in 4 Leo. When it rose, it was at 3 Virgo. You'll notice with these dates as well, you know, it's 2 years and around a month, more or less, you know, so it starts in the end of July, it begins at the beginning of September, 2 years later. And again, this is 2 years and a month. And again, 2 years and a month. So we also know that as a pattern. It's not exactly 2 years, but 2 years and a month. And you can see that where the Cazimi occurs and then where it rises is pretty much, you know, around about 30 degrees. This one's a little bit bigger. It's a bit more space. And I'm sure there's an astronomical reason for that I haven't realized. The other thing that I notice is, you know, so the Cazimi in 2017 started at 4 Leo and it rose at 3 Virgo. The next time the Cazimi came along, it was in the sign of Virgo, a little bit further along, and then it went to Libra. The next time the Cazimi came along, it started in Libra, a little bit further along, ended in Scorpio. The next time, or this time, it starts in Scorpio and it ends in Capricorn. It's completely skipped Sagittarius. And actually, when I was looking back through the records of the Cazimis, you can see that sometimes it does skip a sign. And, you know, you know, sometimes it appears to have 3 years difference, but it's not. It's just, you know, it ends like this one. It's at the end of the year of 2023. When the next Cazimi starts, that's in 2026, in January. So it looks like it's 2 years, 3 years, you know, just from the year dates, but it's still 2 years and approximately a month. But the next time it starts in Capricorn, a little bit further along from this Capricorn. So you can see there's a bit of a pattern that's emerging. And I always think that's helpful. Yeah, and so we went through each time. So I was commenting that around this time there was a lot of talk in Europe and around the UK about Brexit and how people were voting, but also that I noticed a change in political narrative in the way people were reporting on things during this time. Obviously, this, here we've got the Cazimi in Virgo, which is very interesting because Virgo is all about health, public health, doing the right thing. And then, there's this strong emphasis and sort of execution of it in Libra, which, is interesting. Kimberly, I described Libra as, rulers ruling with a silken glove. And then Kimberly said, she's got Libra rising. She's got her sun in Libra. She said, Librans often feel like a silver glove, but they can go to like leather, which I think is more Scorpio. But it's interesting, what I really observed from my own perspective, and it's only my opinion and my observations. You might have experienced this differently. But the whole idea of the pandemic that occurred, yes, there was this very strong public health outcry and these ideas on what public health was. And our roles and responsibilities as citizens, and the way it was executed with the Libra thing, that it was all balanced. Everything needed to be fair. We had to save grandma. We had to save young children and vulnerable people. And yet there was a very sort of blanket approach that didn't give people the chance to really think things through for themselves. It was like, no, leave it to the grown-ups. We know what's best. And of course, then around this time, certain things had already been rolled out a few months before then. But it was very interesting that the whole idea of the rollouts was that it was very fair and there was a very strong narrative about what you could say and what you couldn't. So the Libra idea, I think, was that we could only say things that really helped people, and anything that didn't appear to help people was stopped. Like censorship really came up, which at some level is a really lovely air sign and very sort of balanced Libra thing, in terms of we need to be helpful across the board to everyone and eliminate any kind of hate speech. If you think Libra is in opposition to Aries, and if you're talking about hate speech, you might talk about one of the Mars signs rather than one of the Venus signs. But of course, what's opposite hate speech, or the idea of hate or anger, which could be represented by Aries or Scorpio, in fact. And you've got Libra or Taurus, which both are Venus things, Venus ruled signs. And you get that niceness. And so, I also recognize we've had nodal things going on as well, haven't we? We've been working through the Scorpio Taurus nodes, and then last year we went into the Aries and Libra nodes. Now, with each of those nodal shifts, there was a Mars node and a Venus node. So when we were going through the North Node in Taurus, the North Node was ruled by Venus and the South Node was represented by Mars, in Scorpio. Now we've got the shift. So, our North Node is ruled by Aries, which is kind of like Mars, and our South Node in Libra is very much by Venus. So the two of these have been battling out the idea of light versus dark, male versus female. Very interesting that during these two nodal times and also during these two Cazimi times, there's been a lot of chatter about gender and what you can and can't do. So I really do feel like things have been ruled with a silken glove. It looks like it's all silky and for everyone's best interests, and yet it's actually very leathery underneath. It's like, you will do this or we're going to cut you off, we're going to silence you. So it's very, very interesting times. And that really left us to this time. So, the Cazimi really starts when the moon and the sun and Mars are within 17 minutes of arc difference from each other. That actually starts on the 17th of November in the UK and Europe, and in Asia, maybe even the 16th actually towards Australia and New Zealand. And then it comes into its exact moment on the 18th of November in the early hours of the morning. And then it's still playing out on the 19th. So it is a kind of 2-day window, but it's exact on the 18th. So let's have a look now. So anyway, Mars Cazimi Like I said, 18th November, 5:43 London time. I always think these important times, it's a good time to capture your energy. Capture, that sounds so sinister, doesn't it? It's a time to focus your intentions. If you've got a really bold plan for what you want to achieve in this time, then now is the time to do it. So obviously the sun is in a conjunction with Mars. You can see it here very strongly. It's also in a conjunction with Ceres. That's worth understanding, you know, that Ceres is also there in the coding for this. So what does that mean? You know, we're on the start of a new survival journey, or a thriving journey, a thriving story, a hero story, however you want to think about it. And this hero story might also have something to do with looking after your nearest and dearest. It might have something to do with ownership. And by ownership, I don't mean like you own people, but what I mean is like you take responsibility. I really see this as a time when we can manage so many more things than we realize, and that we are absolutely taking full responsibility. A bit like Mother Nature, you know, Mother Nature, or Ceres, or Demeter, you might want to call her. And I do recognize there's some crossover with Gaia, who was married to Uranus. But, you know, Ceres, the energy of Ceres, you know, essentially she manages so much. You know, she understands when seeds are about to burst forth, you know, when seed heads explode. She understands the migration patterns of all the birds and the fish and all sorts of different things, you know, so she knows all the different cycles, and she's kind of tuned into the cycles of life and also the cycles of death and grief, which I think is equally as important. You know, in the Ceres story, if you look at Ceres story, and yeah, I've shared this story so many times, and each time I share it and think about my own story and think about other people's stories, I get a deeper understanding. But I actually see that Ceres is very much about birth, life, and death, the whole continuing saga of life, and also about the very deep grief that we go through when those that we're protecting are not protected. So I do think as part of this cycle, there's going to be a very, very strong theme of grief, about abduction, about people being taken from us, about the thought of what we've lost, and that part of the grief, or that loss of innocence maybe, is part of our growth in this cycle, which I think, you know, is important to understand. And if we think about it, you know, over the last few years, I mean, what have we done? We've lost, like, the story, you know, that the mainstream media has portrayed, is that we've lost many people to a pandemic. Actually, I think the loss is much more than that. I think the losses we've been through has been the loss of innocence in and trust in our governments and our systems and the way we're set up. I think we've lost some closeness with people, you know, where we've found ourselves being kind of pulled apart and separated. Sorry, it's still fly season in Portugal. In our separation, we've lost something. I do think we're going to reclaim that, because all cycles go round. So, you know, when we are pulled apart, we come back together again. But, you know, there is learning involved. So I do think this is a massive growth cycle and learning cycle, as we deal with the necessary grief that we may still be carrying in our bodies. Because I, you know, one of the things about Mars is, you know, when I was reflecting last night with Kimberly about Mars, I think of Mars as where my vitality comes from. Okay, I've got a first house Mars, so yeah, he is very much about my vibrancy and vitality. But, you know, to me, Mars is that kind of internal combustion engine. It's that, you know, that thing that makes you like go grr, you know, and it girds your loins, you know, it makes you stronger. It's that determination. And so I really think it is also the will to live, the will to survive. I mean, you know, one of the ways you see Mars, and if you think about his Greek counterpart, Ares, or Ares, you know, the god of war. And Kimberly tells me that actually the god of war wasn't Mars, but Mars was adopted. I don't know about that, but you know, Mars has been called the god of war, and so you think of conflict. and strife. And there are other archetypes of fighting, for instance Eris, and Eris definitely brings up a lot of discord and strife. But what I get with Mars is more of a fight for principle, and a fight not for vengeance, but more a fight for principle, a fight for what's right, and a fight for survival. I have to fight. It is the ultimate boundary that you pull for yourself. It's about survival, I think. So seeing, survival highlighted with grief and understanding grief really is a clue to me that in this 2-year period, and it makes me quite worried about the conflict that's taking place in the Middle East right now, because and in other places, I should say, because if people are fighting for survival and fighting and going through grief, to me that sort of indicates that these are very, very volatile times. I mean, duh. Not to mention we've just had the new moon in Scorpio, and as you see, this Mars Cazimi is still actually in opposition to Uranus. Where is it? There it is. So the fact that it's in opposition to Uranus is very enlightening as to what's likely to occur over this next 2-year period. There's going to be some inner conflict. Now, you might want to decide for yourself right now how that might occur. I always think it's good to engage in the planets and the patterns, because I think when you're using that energy that's presented to you, that we're surrounded by, you're working with it. When you don't use it, it kind of whacks you and slaps you around the face and takes you by surprise. And obviously with Uranus here, it's likely to take you by surprise. This is sudden, sharp conflict. Uranus in opposition to Mars. I mean, it's a very, very strong and visceral reaction. And thank goodness that Mars is moving away from this now. But let's face it, the Cazimi is still starting in the ashes of this opposition. It's still an ongoing energy. And, this Uranus Cazimi opposition is also in a square to Saturn. So yes, we're going through these very tense opposing times, which might bring up sudden violence because of our need, or our need to survive, and the perception that we're not safe unless we fight. I think that's also strong perception. I think we're being told that, it's not safe anywhere. And I'm not obviously in the Middle East, and this isn't my sort of comment about the Middle East, because I don't want to go there, to be fair. I think, and this is just, a point. I don't think it's okay to justify killing people because some of your people have been killed, and vice versa. I'm very fortunate that I'm not actually in that position, but I'm seeing different media agencies around the world saying they're forced to annihilate or genocide different populations from both sides. I'm seeing it from both sides playing out. We are completely entitled to obliterate people because of our loss. And I don't see where obliteration or genocide actually equals a justified course of action. I just don't. That's just my personal beliefs. I think there is another space that we can all go to. And again, I'm not ruling that or involved in that, but I always wonder how we can actually find peace. I don't think peace comes from fighting. Personally, I think peace is something that comes up in our hearts. And that it needs to be something that we all do. And I wonder what the world would be like if we all started from a place of peace. And peace, I just want to say, because this all looks like this next Mars journey is going to be all grit and determination, and you have to fight. But actually, and so by comparison, peace looks really wimpy and kind of pathetic, oh, you're not prepared to fight for your rights kind of thing. And people could goad you to say, well, what does peace do? Actually, I think peace is a very brave and courageous place to be. And so I actually wonder if a lot of this conflict, because, I'm not talking about what's going on out there really. What I'm talking about more is what's going on for you right now. So where are you feeling pulled apart right now? Where are you feeling that because things are pulling you apart. You have to fight for your right to live. Now, obviously, if you're actually in imminent danger, you must stand for yourself, because otherwise you're likely to lose your right to life, or lose your chance to take your next breath. And if some of this is perceptual, I wonder how this complete separation, the violent separation and the violent perception of separation, actually helps us to find a different place within us that is actually very, very strong, that actually nurtures ourself, given that Ceres is here, that takes into account for the grief of decades, of generations worldwide, the cumulative grief, because I think we're all talking about cumulative grief here, and cumulative hurt, and the absolute pain and separation of it. But I'm wondering, you know, what we can do. Now, I can see that Saturn down here in this T-square is just kind of like, Saturn, you know, I think is a bit like the authorities, kind of rubbing their hands together, thinking, oh, wow, we've got people fighting on this side and on this side. Ooh, that's interesting, isn't it? You know, what industries are able to profit from human misery? I don't know. God, I sound cynical, don't I? First thing in the morning, I need a coffee. But anyway, what I like about this, and this is why I think humans are likely to soften during this time. Definitely not saying we're not in a crisis point, but I do definitely think we are in a place of softening. So we've got this Cazimi to Neptune, which I think is important. It's the most, apart from this actual Cazimi here, we've got this lovely trine, sorry, to Neptune, not Cazimi. The Cazimi is trine Neptune. It's the closest aspect aside from these two. This trine to Neptune adds in a very strong element of spirituality. And of course, Neptune is then also in a sextile to Uranus. So Neptune is one of these areas that we can kind of offset, off gas. You know, we can, you know, like if you imagine the tension, it's almost like the sort of almost explosive energy that's captured in every bottle of fizzy pop. And, you know, Neptune here is like the taking the lid off, but rather than just taking it off after you've shook it up, you just gradually ease it off. And so I see like Neptune is a bit like a release valve for this Cazimi event. Neptune. And so what are the themes of Neptune? Well, it's transcendence, loads of creativity, oneness. You know, they are the high level qualities of Neptune. It's definitely not personalizing it. It's almost taking a step out. I mean, when I think of Neptune, I think of opium, and I think of drugs that can help separate us from our original pain. Now, you know, this could actually represent the mass dumbing down of society. It could actually represent us all getting on different tablets or drink or whatever we need to lessen the tension. But it could also be breath work, meditation, coming together, deep personal inquiry. I think Neptune is very much a spectrum. So at one end, you've got losing your identity because of oneness and coming together. And at the other end, you've got this, I need to lose and forget who I am. So you got the forgetfulness where you might be using hard drugs and booze and excitement and this, that, and the other to distract yourself. So distraction is likely to come up as well. But equally, I think there's going to be a strong call for people to find another way. And I really do see that with Neptune, you've got the chance for higher love, unconditional love, as much as humans can muster anyway. That the idea of radical forgiveness, radical compassion. What would compassion do right now? What would forgiveness do right now? And what would it look like if we were all able to stay in a place of neutrality and forgiveness? Who knows? We've also got this sextile to Moon and Pluto from the Cazimi. In fact, this is one thing that I noticed on the day of the Cazimi. So Mars and the Sun come together exactly. And then not long after, the Moon is exactly in a conjunction with Pluto. So, you know, within a few hours. That is really sort of tinderbox stuff. Because if you think like the Sun can represent the masculine as well, you know, masculine and feminine. It can represent adult, child, father, mother, and then you've got each of the rulers of Scorpio in a conjunction with our mother and our father, our masculine, our feminine, our physical represented by the sun, and our psyche, our spiritual, our emotional represented by the moon. So it's like, no matter how we're looking at this in the next 2 years, every aspect of ourselves, every polarity of ourselves is being transformed by one of these deep Scorpio planets. I think that's very intense and absolutely really part of the energy. Yes. So this is very strong energy. Now, if you were to intentionally use the energy of this Cazimi to create something that is absolutely an amazing observation and deep, strong feeling of how the sun and moon operate in your chart, and to use it in such a way that is like transforming and is going to really draw a much bigger line against your life. I think this could be one of the most phenomenal Mars Cazimis that you're likely to live through. I mean, the last time, you know, it was going through Scorpio, I was leaving school. You know, when I look back at what was going on there, I was setting out in life. And I really think, you know, these cycles, you know, go back, look at what was going on between 1991 and 1993. And then from the Cazimi in 1993, that's the one that matches the 2026 one where it starts in Capricorn. What were you doing between 1991 to 1993? And whatever you were doing, your search for independence somehow, and your search for power, because obviously this is taking place in Scorpio, but it also rises in Capricorn. You know, these two signs are absolutely synonymous with power, our search for power, our search for meaning through power. It really reminds me back to the times when we had Saturn in Scorpio and Pluto in Capricorn, when they were mutually in each other's signs. I really saw a strong grab for power through, you know, the corporates and the governments at that time. So we've got this same kind of feeling going on right now. It's huge. Other things, obviously, the moon and Pluto are also in a trine with Uranus. So again, this moon Pluto and the Neptune energy, they are our release valves for the intensity of this Cazimi, but it's super dynamic. So they were the biggest things I wanted to sort of capture. Oh, and the last thing, we've got this quincunx and semi-sextile to, you know, the North Node and South Node. So even the nodes are absolutely aligned with some kind of planetary geometry to this Cazimi. So this one is absolutely on our path of karma somehow, if you believe in karma, that is, you know. Or if I always think of the nodes as being a timeline, you know. You know, we've got our past, and again, this also just depends if you believe in time as an actual concept. But you know, we've got the past and we're moving to the future, and there's its sense of purpose. So this is a very, very strong one. I think in this Cazimi, a lot of us are going to come to a new realization. You know, it's like we're coming to our senses. And I think, you know, this is the opportunity for us to find ourselves in our own power. I bloody well hope so. Okay, so Mars is visible now, and this chart, I think, really lets us know how we can express our Mars journey here. So it rises on the 9th of January 2024, 7:16 London, UK time. You'll see Mars is here right on the ascendant at 3 degrees in the sign of Capricorn. It's really worth looking at where Mars met Cazimi at 25 degrees Scorpio and where it's rising at 3 degrees Capricorn. So where do these sit in your chart? Which house are they in? Are you using whole sign? Personally, I don't go for whole sign. I prefer to, you know, look at my chart in this kind of format, like Placidus or Cock, you know, whatever works best for you. So yeah, look at where they're landing. Are they connecting to any of your planets? And what does that mean? So anyway, Mars is at 3 degrees Capricorn. It's in a lovely trine with Jupiter. That, from word go, I think is quite good. on our Mars journey, wherever Mars is rising, we're able to express the power of that Cazimi in quite a beneficial way and quite a strong way, with a lot of energy, a lot of vigor, a lot of potential health. You know, if health is something you wanted to turn around, seeing this in a lovely trine is very, very beneficial. Mars is square Neptune, which isn't so good for mental health, I don't think, or for things like allergies and things like that. So if you are looking from, you know, at your Mars journey from the perspective of health, I would pay more attention, you know, do things to get your physical health tip top, but really have a mind for things like your mental health, your spiritual health, and in particular, any kind of possible inflammations, like hidden inflammations and things that come up as an allergic response. I often find that Mars square Neptune is, and I'm not a doctor, obviously, but Mars square Neptune, I've seen really in the charts of people with sort of autoimmune type things. So if health is an issue, look at the foods and lifestyle that might be contributing to those kinds of things. I think it's really worth looking at epigenetics, by the way. The whole idea that, you know, our genes can be turned on or off. So they can be turned on to create good health, or turned off. Like, you know, if you've got a tendency in your genes, if you've been told, oh, you've got the genetic markers for this kind of problem, you can actually like turn those genes on and turn them off with your lifestyle. It's worth looking at. So I think you have a certain potential to turn your health around. You know, if you're using this Mars Cazimi to strengthen yourself, this is a time of great learning, put it that way. Now, what I really like about this, so Mars is, you know, himself is only really in that strong trine. And yeah, he's also in that like tough old square to Neptune, but it's a separating square, which is great. So, you know, it's a square of the past, and it's an advancing trine, like applying trine to Jupiter. So it's like more positive and more forward facing than the square. So I really see that this energy is moving us away from the problems, the perceived problems of the past, and moving us towards the solution of the future. So I think that's really great. And then there's all these other factors around the time when Mars is visible again. So we've got Moon conjunct Ceres, which I love. That's also semi-sextile the Sun, and it's also trine Chiron and the North Node. I mean, could it get any more healing than that is what I want to ask. You know, the Moon and the Sun in a semi-sextile is kind of sweet. You know, they're kind of working together. They're not fighting each other, which is great. So it feels like you've got your physical and your emotional and your psyche all working beautifully. You know, they are kind of in synchronicity, let's say. They're helping each other. And then the Moon is very nourishing. The Moon really wants to help and support itself. You know, it is a nourishing thing. I was interview on my other channel, the Barefoot Broadcast. I was chatting with somebody yesterday who can see etheric energetic blueprints and works with the energy of etheric architecture. You know, so he can look at your architecture and tinker around and make changes and get things working really beautifully. And he was talking actually that the dark mother energy that has been surrounding the earth for quite a while, and the dark father, but he was talking about the dark mother. And he was saying that it's like a void of nourishment, and that humanity has been going through this void of nourishment for too long. When I see this, where Mars is rising with the Moon and Ceres together, I'm thinking there's our nourishment. This is us coming back into a place of nourishing ourselves. Where the dark mother or the mother archetype was poorly expressed in our life, we have to mother ourselves. We absolutely have to do it for ourselves. We need to pick ourselves up and love us like a little child that we really desperately wanted to have. We need to love ourselves like we would our beautiful offspring. So I see this as a complete love for ourselves. It has to start with us. We have to love the self. We have to nourish our psyche and get to the root of things. And so that trine to Chiron is really showing us, you know, all the things we need to to have as resources on our journey are there for us. I'm not saying it won't be painful, because you know, the sun is also in a trine to Chiron, in a square to Chiron. That's not so easy. And the sun is also in a T-square to the nodes, which is giving us a bit of a challenge. But, you know, what I see is our pain becomes very visible to us during this next Mars period. And we have the chance to actually see and witness our vulnerability and do something about it. You know, for a lot of the time, you know, things are hidden. And this is the other great thing about this Cazimi in Scorpio. Let me just go back. Yeah. So like Scorpio, like all the water signs, I always think, you know, Pisces is like the ocean. I always think Cancer is like a river. And I always think that Scorpio is like a muddy puddle or a deep, deep lake that you can't see the bottom of. And if you think about a lake, you know, everything goes in it, it gets contained, it can't move, so it can stagnate. Things can really brew in. It's like a big cauldron, isn't it? You know, like where all the ingredients go in. And, you know, if you were cooking it down, it would get more and more potent. You know, essentially all of life's ingredients go into the bottom of your Scorpio lake. And with this Cazimi, everything is stirred up. Everything that has been contained within us is being stirred up. It's being looked at, and you know, that sediment is going to rise up. And you know, as it rises up, we can't forget about it. We get to see it, and that's what I really get as you know, an analogy for how we can work with this energy. So Mars is stirring it up. And then when Mars becomes visible again, we've got the brilliant astrological energy to, having been stirred up, to observe what we've been stirred about and what we need to heal. And I absolutely say that there's a real healing space where we are openly vulnerable, where we see our vulnerability, where we are absolutely transparent about it. That's where our greatest step forwards is. So I see this as being really brilliant. And we've also, you know, so the sun looks like a bit of a baddie, you know, stirring up all these old patterns on our timeline in its T-square to the nodes. However, the sun is also in a grand trine with Uranus and Juno. So this is interesting because there's a bit of a reversal here. At the time of the Mars Cazimi, Mars is actually in a trine with Neptune, kind of saying, yeah, we need to get spiritual. And then by the time Mars is visible, it's in a square and saying, God damn, that spirituality is a bit painful. And at the time of the Cazimi, you know, the sun and Mars were really kind of working with that opposition energy of Uranus. And now, you know, the sun is actually working with Uranus. So the opposition has stirred the sun up and thought, okay, I am feeling separate. There are parts of myself that are feeling really, really separate. And now we're actually starting to acknowledge it and bring it back together. And the fact that the grand trine with Uranus is also with Juno is great. Juno, the goddess of marriage, she's also about commitment and dedication, higher love. She's also about a sneaky little affair too. I mean, she does definitely bring in some sensuality, let's put it that way. But Juno is our commitment to transparency and truth. I mean, I love Uranus. Yes, he is shocking as hell, but you know, Uranus brings us to our truth very, very quickly. So we've got this dedication to truth and self. I really like this. So this is where I see Mars being visible. So I'm excited. So if I was in your shoes, I would be asking you right now, where is the Cazimi taking effect in your chart, and where is he rising? So I know in my chart, the Cazimi is taking effect in the first house, is rising right at the tail end of my second house. And if I was to do that whole sign, he'd be rising in my first, the Cazimi would be in my first, rising in my third. Has a slightly different meaning. And I think, you know, if you're not sure about what you believe, whether you're a whole sign or not whole sign, play with it. look at where they sat in the past from a whole sign perspective, and then not from a whole sign perspective. Which one fits your story? I don't think one system needs to necessarily fit all. We have our preferences. Like if a client wants tropical, I give them tropical. If they want sidereal, that's what they get. So, you know, we can look at things, look at the models we're using. So anyway, let's have a look now. In last night's live stream, I had a couple of people asking about the positions of their, you know, they were telling me in the chat about their architecture. I did say I was going to go back to it and I didn't, so I'm going to do it now. So let's have a look now. So we had somebody called LoneStar Gemini, and they revealed, you can see, I had to copy their comments from the chat, you know, with cut and paste. But what I got from LoneStar Gemini is they've got Mars in Aquarius in the 8th house with the North Node. I didn't actually put a picture of the North Node, but that would be here. So this is a very, very flat chart, and I'm doing it from a whole sign perspective. So their Mars is in opposition to the Moon and the South Node in the 2nd house. So the South Node and Moon versus North Node and Mars. So already this person has got a very, very strong Mars and Moon kind of energy. So it'd be interesting to see how that's going to fit in with the Cazimi. And they've got an air trine from Mars to Gemini, the Gemini Sun, and Uranus is retro. Now I know that the Sun is 7 degrees approximately, because they also revealed their actual birthday, the 29th of May. So their Sun is at 7 degrees, and they've got a grand trine with Mars and the North Node and retro Uranus in the 12th, which actually creates a really good kite. I like kites as they show up in a chart. So this is where the previous Cazimi in 2021 occurred, and that would have been in a conjunction with their Sun in their 4th house, and it was expressed through their 5th. So in the last 2 years, one of the things I recognize for you, LoneStar, is the fact that you were given an opportunity actually to get things really kind of set up for you at home, to get a feeling of belonging. It's been a journey of belonging. Like, where do you belong? Like, especially given the separation between your Mars and your Moon and the nodes, which will have created a really strong pull and an insecurity to do with, you know, where your purpose is versus the purpose of everyone else. And of course, that makes it quite difficult, you know, when you're trying to set up home or feel like there's a sense of belonging, you know, when you feel the value of yourself and yet other people seem to have a bit of anger or issues. I always think the 8th is a bit like a place of issues and tissues, you know. It's like the place of blame, shame, guilt, anger, regret, and they're all values that other people are putting on you, which is kind of interesting. But it's also, you know, they share the theme of money and sorting that out. Now, this last Cazimi with the Sun in the 4th would have given you a chance to get really stable or get more stability, or at least explore stability. So you're also resolving at some level your past beliefs about your money and your value, and also understanding the value of opposition from people in your life, and how actually they've helped you to release some things from your unconscious, like Uranus in the 12th. I've got mine there. It's very powerful. You hold on to all your emotions and memories and things like that. And it can be very, very a shocking place, but it's also a very psychic place and a place where you can do a lot of learning. These are all in very psychic houses, LoneStar. So this last Cazimi would have created a lot of change for you, which you could have expressed through your hobbies, through your children, through all the things that you're creating, through romance even. You know, a deeply, deeply creative time. It's really helping you, like, connect into that thought of yourself as a master creator, you know, very much about the law of attraction. I see that this last 2 years has really put you in touch with the truth of who you are. Now, this current Cazimi that takes you from here and is expressing through your 7th. Now, again, I'm using whole sign. I don't know what your preference is, but this is just me, you know, going on what I see. You've got this opportunity to take the the romance and the creativity. Someone's coming into my room. Excuse me 1 second. I've got a naked child here. This is my little, he's just got up. So hang on 1 second. Okay, so motherhood crisis averted. I've just got my youngest dressed. He's just woken up and he was like wondering where I was. So he's all dressed and sorted. So anyway, back to LoneStar Gemini. That's the whole thing about working from home, isn't it? and how we can run our lives at the same time. So anyway, LoneStar, what I really see is the feeling of how you've tuned into yourself as a divine creator and how you've really got up close and personal with your true value. Excuse me, I'm still recording. Let me just try that again. I just got stopped again by a different child this time. So anyway, LoneStar Gemini, you have been absolutely playing with the energies of being a divine creator. And in this next period, in this next sort of Mars Cazimi period, I see you taking all the power of knowing your true purpose, that sense of knowing about your purpose, and the absolute pleasure and the romance and the mystery and the intrinsic power of what you're doing, and you're taking it out into the world and reaching customers, people. If you met somebody in the last 2 years, this is a deepening. Your creation is likely to bring you into new friendships, possible, romances, possible partnerships. Whatever you were birthing in the last 2 years, it's now time to birth it even deeper and to get more of a collaboration. Now, what I really see is in the following 2 years, like from 2026, this is birthing a deeper understanding of the world and an even bigger expansion that could take you to places far, far away, could see you move. So, it all starts with the journey you've just been on, actually, where you had a much grander sense of who you are and what you're about. And now that beautiful purpose is turning into a bit of a mission, and it's going to reach the support of many other people. So I hope that's helpful. Let's look at another example. So Irene in the chat room last night on my live stream with Kimberly, she in the notes put that she's got an Aries rising, Sun in Virgo, Moon in Scorpio, Mars retro 12th in Aries. Okay, now I didn't have time to mock up something individual for Irene. So Mars, it is in Aries, but it's actually in the 12th house. So I've just put it here, just so, as a little marker. But the Aries rising is important. Here, Irene, she's got Mars as her ruling planet, and Mars actually rules her moon as well. Her moon's in Scorpio. Now, this would have been quite strong for Irene in the last 2 year period, because she was learning stuff about herself through the projections of her relationships. Her last 2 years have been probably very they've instructed her about how her relationships are playing out in the world. And yeah, actually, what games is she playing in response to her relationships? It would have been really quite insightful and expressed through the 8th house, which is of mystery, secrets. I suspect lots of new stuff was coming up for her. With her moon in the sign of Scorpio, in the 8th house, I imagine her intuition came on in leaps and bounds, and also her acknowledgement of past guilt, shame, blame, anger, and all of her part in it, the sort of projected part, would have become very clear, as would have the games of other people. So I think it's been a very, strong psychological time for her. Now, what's happening is, she's had, I think, a really big clearing of energy. She's, and if you think her sun is in the 6th, this is somebody who absolutely wants her life to work really beautifully. So in this last 2 year period, she's been given the chance to really clear out some of the behaviors and thoughts and belief systems of the past that are linked into her family, her upbringing, and anything where she perceives that she's guilty or being blamed for. She can shrug that off now. And her journey now, from this clear perspective, is taking her into her 10th, taking her into a place of standing on her own 2 feet, of feeling really strong, of feeling, you know, like she's building a good reputation in the world, like she's expectant of receiving things. You know, I really see that what she's done is, it's almost like the last 2 years have been a very, very intense healing retreat. You know, she's learned everything that she needs to learn, really, to take her to this next stage of accomplishment. My last example then from people in the live stream last night is Nubianette. Now, I've worked with Nubianette's chart before, and so I've put the Cazimis and where they were rising over her chart. So the first thing that I notice is the last 2 years, so from 2021 to 2023, you know, this was really on the cusp between her 7th and 8th house. That's where the Cazimi was, but it was really coming up and being executed through her south node. So, you know, where Mars was rising, it was right on her south node. So over the last 2 years, I imagine that Nubianette has reconnected with a lot from her past, reconnected with old family from the past. Like the 8th house here is all about our familial inheritance, you know, all those old family values, all those people from the past, you know, and part of our old story. It's like our inheritance. You know, lots of people talk about the 8th house in terms of the financial benefits of it, you know, as a place of inheritance. But I also see it as, you know, juggling around with the inheritance of the DNA that, you know, we were born with, and the stories and the connections and the cost of having those connections as well. It's also very, very, you know, close to her Neptune in the 9th house. Now, the interesting thing is with this Cazimi, as it's occurring right now, it's actually really, really close, just a couple of degrees. Sorry, it's right in between her Neptune and Mercury here. You know, it's at 25 degrees in the sign of Scorpio, and it's in her 9th house. Now, if you remember, when I was speaking about the Cazimi that was in my 9th house and also in the 9th house of Kimberly last night, we were talking about how we moved. Now, I happen to know that Nubianette is wanting to migrate. So seeing this taking place over the next 2 years, I think this is good news for you, Nubianette, to know that the next course of action is coming from the 9th house, and it's going to be expressed really actually just into your 11th house. So this is interesting. So the 9th house is all about, you know, where we're traveling, where we're expressing ourselves at a much deeper level, where we're understanding a new context for life, where we are experiencing an uplift, you know, a new way of being, you know, so our philosophies, our belief patterns, our politics, our spirituality is likely to enlarge, engorge, you know, it's going to get inflamed with lots of new and interesting situations. Now, for you, this could, you know, mean lots of new people in your life and interactions. And I really see that with Mercury here. Mercury is one of the planets that I really do think of as an avid traveler. I also think Mercury represents people in general and like a childlike curiosity, and also something that is changing the way she thinks. The fact that it's so close to Neptune as well is really indicating that this is a bit of a spiritual uplift time. You know, so I actually think that in this next 2 year period for you, Nubianette, the possibility, I know the possibility you've been holding to migrate and go somewhere of a different culture, a different language, with new people and a new outlook. I really see this as a really great opportunity for you. Now, the great news is your Neptune and your Mercury are so beautifully placed in your charts as well, and also connected to Jupiter, which is also you know, a massive traveler, of course. So, you know, it all looks really good. And this is being expressed just in between the 10th and the 11th house. Now, as I understand it, you know, there's the possibility of you like retiring or working in a completely different way, possibly working as a digital nomad, and also being really connected to a new kind of community, a new way of being. And so I'm really seeing the social aspects being really, really highlighted. It's almost like you are working and working and working and working to get ready to then be in this very socially beautifully connected and networked area, whereby you could actually feasibly be a digital nomad as well. Now, the interesting thing is from 2026, the energy is picking up from the networking, the friendships, the new alliances that you've made, and it's bringing you right to yourself. So the next, the next Cazimi as it comes, when Mars is rising just 3 degrees into your first house, very, very close to your ascendant. So whatever is going on in this next 4-year period, it really feels like you are moving yourself from your current environment. You are expanding in such a joyful and unexpected way that is allowing you to make lots of new contacts and different contacts from a completely different culture, language set, etc., etc. And then from there, it feels like you've been reborn. So I really see that this is all part of a 4-year process. So I hope that was helpful for you. And I wish you good luck with your move if you do take it, after all, after the planning and the excitement that I know you've been going through about it. So I hope that's helpful. In the next recording, I'm going to look at the 12 signs on a sign-by-sign basis. I really recommend you do it from your ascendant. You can do it from your sun, but it's so much stronger from your ascendant. I'll show you a link that you can use if you don't already know your ascendant. But anyway, in the next video, I will be looking at where the Cazimi was, where it is now for you, how it's expressing, and what it's lining you up for the next one in 2026. So you're getting a picture of the last 2 years, where you are for the next 2-year period, and then where that's leading to. So if that's of interest, then check it out. Lots of love, and thanks for listening, and see you another time. Bye for now.